Welcome to Monday Night Live, the gluten-free, aspiring to be viral YouTube show all about Notre Dame football from the staff at Inside ND Sports and the Rivals Network. I'm Eric Hansen. The guy in the other box is Tyler James. Our recruiting writer, Kyle Kelly, is busy providing some insight on the building 2024 Irish recruiting class. Lots to talk about tonight, including the assessment of whether Notre Dame has successfully improved its roster over the 2022 season. And we'll take your questions. That segment is coming up soon. So start filling up the question portal.
Yeah, and before you submit any questions, make sure you hit the thumbs up to like this video and make sure you are subscribed to us. We are fastly approaching our 1,000 subscribers goal, and we appreciate all the help we can to get there. The response has been good. I think Eric and I are trying to figure out whether we want to continue doing this on Mondays or maybe a different night of the week during the off season. But I think we're going to keep putting these out there for you guys and letting you guys join us live and giving you some as close to weekly YouTube content as possible as we continue into the off season and leading up into spring football. So we thank you for that. Eric will get us started tonight as you guys submit questions to give us some more topics with his quick takes of the latest headlines around Notre Dame football. Eric, what is your first headline?
Well, some of these are slower takes than others, but this one's a quick take. Has Notre Dame, through recruiting in the transfer portal, improved its roster over last season? Let's start with the latest addition, which is defensive end Javontae Jean-Baptiste from Ohio State. He was a reserve with the Buckeyes, but he did have 4.5 sacks. I mean, his numbers were pretty comparable to Jordan Botelho's. His playing time was kind of comparable. You know, I think he's a guy that could really help Notre Dame. It'll be interesting to see if they try to play him in a rotation with Jordan Botelho at Viper, or if they try to develop him at the end on the other side where Justin Adamalola was playing. So that gives them 6 transfers, 24 recruits. 12 of those recruits are starting classes Tuesday and starting winter workouts very shortly after that. So, Tyler, I don't know how we want to break this down. I think position by position makes sense, but also,
sure.
So why don't we start with that? So let's start with the quarterback position. They lose Drew Pine through the transfer portal. They add Sam Hartman. You have Tyler Buckner still. And Steve Angeli and Ron Paulus III, and then you're adding another quarterback in Kenny Minchie. So is that a net gain, do we feel like?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's very close. I think bringing Sam Hartman onto the team makes that an absolute gain and potentially a seismic one. We'll see how things play out for Sam Hartman at Notre Dame this season, but that is the biggest news of the offseason by far for Notre Dame. And it's hard to imagine Notre Dame adding anyone onto its roster between now and the start of the season that will have a bigger impact than Sam Hartman.
Okay, so let's go to running back.
I assume you agree with that?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that. I mean, I think that's kind of a no-brainer there. I mean, really the thing is, how good is Hartman going to be in this Notre Dame offense? And I wrote about this in the Jaden Greathouse article. Sometimes early enrollment is overstated. I don't think in this case it is, because Sam Hartman's learning a new offense.
Right.
He's trying to get chemistry with receivers. So those 3 freshmen that are coming in, that have come in basically, they arrived this weekend, is going to make a difference. I mean, there's a really talented wide receiver roster. Now, whether they develop is another thing, but in terms of sheer talent, recruiting pedigree, this is the best roster that Notre Dame has had in a long time when it comes to wide receivers. And again, the more that they get used to Sam Hartman, the quicker that decision's kind of publicly made. And then the other thing I like about it is you have a really good number 2 in Tyler Buckner, a guy that that can win games. and that can give you another dimension if you need that. And I also like the addition of Kenny Minchie, that you have a kind of a longer term prospect that's getting his feet wet. And again, he's a kind of high ceiling, but we don't really know a lot about the specifics of that. I think people are much more definitive in their expectations for CJ Carr, who's in the 2024 class. Minchie might turn out to be the better of the two, but that isn't certainly the arc he's on right now. But there's just a lot to discover about him. So be interesting to see how the reps are divvied up, because you got to give so many to Buckner and Sam, but you want those other guys to develop as well.
Yeah, and I don't know that we need to really talk about the running back position because there hasn't been a change there. So let's jump ahead to the wide receiver spot.
Other than adding Jeremiah Love.
Right. Yeah. I guess. I mean, it can't get worse, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, if the only change is an addition, you would have to be a very bad player to make the position worse. So,
right.
So let's talk about receiver. You started to talk a little bit about that. In addition to the wide receiver recruits that Notre Dame has added, Notre Dame added a grad transfer commitment from Virginia Tech wide receiver Caleb Smith, and then losing Braden Lenzy, who is no longer playing football, Avery Davis, who wasn't able to play this past season because of injury. What do you think about how the wide receiver position has improved, or maybe did not improve from year to year?
Yeah. So, and Joe Wilkins is in the portal. They brought back Matt Salerno for a 6th year. It's interesting because, the more that I hear about the older Caleb Smith, who's the transfer, I guess we'll call him Caleb Smith Sr., Caleb Sr., the more that I think he has a chance to fight for a starting position. And that's saying something given the talent. I went back and looked in the Rivals era. Notre Dame and that runs when they went to 250. So when we're talking in terms of top 150 receivers, top 150 prospects, Notre Dame has never had 6 top 150s on the same roster at the same time in that period. And that includes the time when Golden Tate and Michael Floyd were on the roster together. Now, those two obviously were tremendous. You have a Biletnikoff Award winner and the all-time leading receiver, but you didn't have the depth of those top 150. So you have 3 in the recruiting class that's coming in as early enrollees: Jaden Greathouse, Rico Flores Jr., Braylon James. Then you have 3 existing in the perplexing Lorenzo Styles, and then really coming on Jaden Thomas, and also an ascending Deion Colsey. I'm sorry, Jaden Thomas isn't in that group. Deion Colsey is, and then Tobias Merriweather from the class in between those two. So there's a lot of talent there, and you would think that Sam Hartman could bring it out. I was just watching some highlights of him today from the Clemson game, and it's going to benefit guys like Tobias Merriweather.
Yeah,
I think he will have. I can make this bold prediction. He will certainly increase his receptions from this past season. But I like them. It's Chancey is still a young coach in terms of developing guys. I think some of what maybe kept them from getting on the field as much as the fans wanted to see Tobias and some of the other guys was just the high standard he held them to, that if they weren't going to get it done in practice, they weren't going to be able to play as much as they would like. And some of it was play calling. I mean, you have Michael Mayer, the best tight end maybe Notre Dame has ever had on the team, and it takes away from some of the plays that you might call for wide receivers. And we saw some of that start to change in the bowl game, in the Gator Bowl game, where there was a nice blend of tight end and wide receiver and throwing to the backs and so forth. So I really like the potential of this group, but I think I'm tapping the brakes until I see some spring practices. Great House is the most advanced of those receivers in terms of probably the most college ready. That doesn't mean he'll turn out to be the best of the three, but that's where he is now. Pretty mature kid. I really enjoyed talking to him, and I think Notre Dame fans are really going to like him.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to like what Notre Dame has done at the position now. I think if Notre Dame could get another receiver potentially, I don't think they would shy away from doing that. I don't know that that's anything that's in the immediate future. That would be maybe another in the later portal window after spring football, maybe investigating if there's someone else worth bringing on to the roster at the wide receiver position. But yeah, I mean,
and that happens. There's quality. I mean, Charlie Jones from Iowa was sitting in the portal
right
after spring practice, and he was dynamic at Purdue, but he kind of already had his mind made up about Purdue.
Yeah, Notre Dame looked into that one, but unfortunately it wasn't able to make that happen. But yeah, I mean, it's important to keep in mind, it's like we expect this evolution from these guys on Notre Dame's roster where, I mean, I think this time last year we expected that from Lorenzo Styles for 2022, and it didn't necessarily come together as we thought it would. So you can't sort of take that development for granted. And just because you've seen some flashes and you would expect that with more experience, the arrow would keep going up, but that's not always the case. So there's obviously work to do there, and it'll be important to continue to monitor how that improves. But yeah, I mean, you spoke about some of the throws that Sam Hartman can make. I have a story coming on InsideNDSports.com on Tuesday morning that will break down a number of the different kind of throws that I saw come up as I reviewed a bunch of Sam Hartman plays. It's just like, wow, if he can do that for Notre Dame's offense, it seems like quite the treat to be a wide receiver with some of the throws that he can make and the positions he'll put his receivers in, and the trust that he shows in his receivers as well. So I think it's an exciting time for Chancey Stuckey as the wide receivers coach, and we'll see how those guys continue to step up and figure out who sort of asserts themselves as maybe the alpha at that position. Because I think even with all that talent, I don't know that we know for sure who's the go-to receiver right now. I think it's anyone's guess who that could be. Obviously, Caleb Smith was that for Virginia Tech last year, so we know he can do that. But will it be him or will it be someone else? I think that'll be one of the more interesting storylines of the offseason for Notre Dame.
One thing that we should throw in there too is Notre Dame's going to have 5 running backs, and we've talked about, you guys have had questions about at times should or would Chris Tyree move to slot full time, maybe Javdarian Price as well. I think those guys will get some action in the slot. I'm not sure that that's a full-time move, especially now with 10 wide receivers on the roster, but that's something to keep in mind when we evaluate wide receivers.
Yeah, and I got a question here sort of on that topic that T-Stop just sent in. Things have been quiet on Javdarian Price since his injury. He looked great in spring and adds to an already talented backfield. Does the staff finally pull the trigger and Tyree put him at wide receiver?
I think some of it is up to Chris, if Chris wants to do that. And if he wants to, I think he could be a starter. They had Jaden Thomas in the slot a lot. And I don't know that he's a natural slot guy, but he certainly did a great job. I mean, at the end of the season of those sophomores, he was playing the most consistent and the best of them. But yeah, I think it's something that they ought to be talking about right now. And by the time, spring practice opens, Price, it has been quiet since his injury. We asked about him a few times, and I think he's back to doing some running and so forth. I don't know how much lateral work he's doing, but I think the timetable was going to at least be open to him participating in spring practice. We'll see, with that Achilles injury. But yeah, I definitely think we'll keep an eye on what's going on with Chris Tyree and see what he thinks about that, because the carries aren't going to increase for him. Diggs and Estime are getting better.
Right.
Price, if he's the guy that we saw last spring, is going to get in there and get some carries. Jabron Payne is on the roster, and then there's, I guess we have 6 running backs. I can't count. And then Jeremiah Love. So that's a lot of people to try to find carries for.
Yeah, and I think the more you have confidence in Jadarian Price being able to contribute this year, the more you can try to play Chris Tyree in the slot. I think it makes sense to get him on the field and use him in different ways, and maybe sharpen his skill set as a wide receiver and practice more than maybe he was doing on a regular basis last season, when he was definitely needed as the third running back, even though the third running back isn't a huge role, but the third running back can pretty quickly become the second running back in an
Right.
offense, given injuries and stuff like that. So I think I would be surprised if Notre Dame's like fully commits to a like full-time position move early on. But I think maybe seeing an increase in those slot reps, and we'll see how things develop to see if it becomes more of a bigger part-time role for Chris Tyree in the slot.
So let's look at tight end. So Michael Mayer.
Worse.
Yeah, okay. It is. There's really no way to spin that.
Right.
I would say, Mitchell Evans, if you're thinking of who's going to be the next guy, who's going to be the next NFL tight end to come out of this system. I mean, I think you do look at Mitchell Evans. Kevin Bauman's been hurt a lot. I think the other guy that could be tight end 1 at some point is Eli Reardon. I love Holden Stays a lot. Holden is 226, or at least he was listed at 226 last year. For him to be an NFL tight end, he's going to have to be bigger than 226, but he could certainly be a different kind of tight end. I mean, he could be a detached tight end that plays some fullback and so forth. It'll just be interesting to see if he develops some of the skills Tommy Tremble had. Tommy was interesting because when he showed up at Notre Dame, nobody was talking about his blocking, and he turned into a ferocious blocker. I mean, just I think that's what got him noticed by the NFL. And obviously the guy can catch, but he was on the same roster with Michael Mayer as well. They're going to have some depth at the position. Cooper Flanagan comes in, the freshman. So it's a decent group. You still have Davis Sherwood in his kind of niche role. But yeah, it's worse.
Yeah, I mean, I still think there's probably a lot of teams across college football that would be happy to take on the talent in Notre Dame's tight end room going into this season. But yeah, I mean, it can't be better when Michael Mayer is leaving, arguably the best tight end in program history. So you have to try to replace him with not one person. Mitchell Evans isn't going to be Michael Mayer next season.
Right.
You're going to have to do it in more than one way, and use more than one guy. I like Holden Stays a lot. I like Eli Reardon a lot too. With coming off of back-to-back ACL injuries, I'm not going to be anticipating much from him until I see stuff for him. I think that's sort of just the way I feel like I need to treat that coming off those injuries. But I like what Holden Stays can do. I thought Davis Sherwood would actually be involved a little bit more in the offense than he was last season. So we'll see if they find more ways to use him. I think sort of the emergence of Mitchell Evans made the need for him a little less. It lessened the need for him. So I think I still would like to see some sort of fullback role for him and use him in different ways, unless you can get another tight end that can do it better than him. So we'll see how that goes. But certainly room for people to step up, and Mitchell Evans showed signs of having the potential to do that with his Gator Bowl performance.
Right. So let's move to the offensive line. I think when you're doing the calculus there, they're losing two really good guards with a lot of experience. Does the young talent at offensive guard and the improvement of the 2 tackles in the center offset losing those 2 guards? I think it's odd to say, but I actually think they can be better. I can't believe I'm saying it, but I do think they can. And I think a second year under Harry, after listening to Aaron Taylor on our podcast, he convinced me that they're going to be a more cohesive unit. They're going to be better at those techniques in year two. More expressing, out of the chute, probably better than this team was. This line was. It took about a month for them to kind of find their footing. I don't think necessarily that group is going to struggle with it, especially if they come out of spring with their starting five. I think this line has a chance to be better, and it doesn't make sense, but I think those tackles are going to continue to get better, measurably better.
Yeah, when your tackles are your best offensive lineman, you have a really good chance of being a good offensive line. So I think the fact that you have Joe Alt and Blake Fisher coming back as better versions of themselves next season, even though some may wonder how does Joe Alt get better, because he was pretty dang good this past season. But I still think there's obviously room for improvement there for both those guys. Zeke Correll, I think, needs to get better from this past season. And then, yeah, I think Notre Dame's not going to come out of the gate to start the season with guards that are better than the way Jarrett Patterson and Josh Lugg were playing towards the end of the season. But I think there's the potential that those guys can fill those holes admirably and maybe bring some different things to those positions that guys like Josh Lugg and Jarrett Patterson didn't. I mean, I really like Jarrett Patterson, and he's certainly good. I think Josh Lugg played his best football, I thought, this past season, but he's not necessarily a physically I mean, he's a very big man, but he's not a mauler. He's not a physically dominant person. Like if Billy Strouth is what Billy Strouth is being hyped of being in terms of how good he is with his hands and his strength and his sort of tenacious style, I think that would bring a sort of different look to the interior of Notre Dame's offensive line than maybe it had this past season. So I think there's the potential there that they could be better than last season.
Yeah, Strouth is somebody that Harry was Heaston was excited about Strouth when he was injured. Then once he was healthy, then he saw what he kind of thought he would see, and just loves the guy's attitude, his toughness. He's got some Quentin Nelson in him as far as physical dominance. I'm not saying he's going to turn into Quentin Nelson, but he certainly has some of the same characteristics that give him a chance to be really, really good. And then whoever is going to be at the other guard, I mean, everybody's kind of been waiting on Rocco. And you have Andrew Kostofik. You have some tackles that would like to get in that mix. Pat Coogan could certainly try to get in that mix as well. I think there's a lot of talent there. We don't expect, it's interesting because they had some freshmen, in 2021 that played, but we don't expect anybody in this group. I think Charles Jaguza is probably the best pure talent and maybe the one that has to learn the most, just having played at a small school lower level. And he also is having surgery here soon. So, he's not coming till June anyways, but, we're not expecting any of the freshmen to really make a dent in the two deeps this year.
All right, that's everything on offense, right? Let's flip over to the defense.
Okay, so let's start at defensive end. So they add Javontae Jean-Baptiste to the defensive end room. I don't think they're as good without Foskey and Justin Adamalola. I don't think there's any way you can
paused too
that.
long there. It's a definite no.
I was trying to calculate some kind of spin, and I just don't. I mean, there's people that will surprise you, but just based on the fact that Junior Tui Halamaka is getting moved there, probably full time now. That Josh Burnham didn't jump up more as a freshman. I mean, I think he played one snap the whole season. Nana Asafa-Mensah played better last year. You're not going to probably have Riley Mills out there. You're probably going to keep him inside. Alex Ahrensberger seemed to go backwards last year. And then you look at the freshmen coming in. If you had Keon Keeley, then you could say, well, maybe there's a path to them being better, because he's pretty special, but he's going to be special at Alabama. So you look at the other guys like Boubacar Traore, and Armel Mucum and that group. Those seem more like long-term propositions than somebody that can get in the two deeps this year.
Yeah, I agree. I like the addition of Jean-Baptiste. I think that's an interesting. I'm interested to see like what he can be in an expanded role. He was playing behind talented defensive ends at Ohio State, playing in a limited role. Pro Football Focus really liked him and gave him some pretty high grades. His defensive grade and pass rush grade ended up being higher than even what Isaiah Foskey got last season, which probably doesn't probably says more about the grading system than it does about
PFF
the players.
Was not high on Foskey last year. It was odd.
And so I think that and I think he's probably going to play more field end than Viper end if I had to guess. Although I think he's more built like a Viper end, but I think they want to play him a little of the other side of it, which is kind of what Justin Adamalola was. Justin Adamalola made more sense as a Viper, but he just couldn't be a Viper because Isaiah Foskey was in the way of that. And he fared pretty well as a strong side defensive end, but I think that we'll probably see a lot of rotation and guys mixing and matching at the end spots. I'd like to see Mills probably staying inside at defensive tackle. I think that makes the most sense. So it's hard, but it's hard. We'll see where they can get, but at this point, I don't think it's reasonable in any way to say that Notre Dame is improved at the defensive end position.
Defensive tackle, Notre Dame probably is going to see how spring practice goes at this point, and then see what else is out there as far as an interior defensive lineman addition, maybe in May after spring practice. Again, if Mills is inside, I feel better about that position group with Mills and Howard Cross, and you have Gabe Rubio, who's an ascending player. Some of it is, what about the Tyson Fords of the world, and the Donovan Heinishes? Are those guys going to be able to step up and be rotational players already as sophomores? So I think that Marcus Freeman would probably feel better if they added a veteran presence, even if it was somebody that gave you rotational snaps like Chris Smith, rather than a potential starter like Fisk was going to be, Braden Fisk was going to be, who ended up at Florida State.
Yeah, it's not really improvement there yet either. I think if Mills finally takes that leap that we've sort of expected him to make and hasn't yet as a defensive tackle, and if Howard Cross just continues to get better, played through an ankle injury this year that I think limited him a decent amount. So can they be better? I don't know. I think I thought of this while you were talking. We didn't mention Brennan Vernon necessarily, or at least I didn't when we were talking about defensive ends. And I think that is someone who could potentially be in the mix to make an impact there as a freshman. At one point,
he's not an early guy, though. I mean, he is
right.
a June enrollee.
He's someone who, at one point in his recruitment, I thought, well, maybe he's going to end up being a defensive tackle, and then he lost a bunch of weight, and now I think he will start at defensive end, be a starter, but start there in terms of his career starting there. Right. So that is someone that bears mentioning. But yeah, the defensive tackles coming in as freshmen, I don't know that any of those guys are guys that you see as ready to contribute right away for Notre Dame.
All right. Devin Houston, I think, is the early enrollee in that group. So, okay, linebackers. It's got to be better no matter how you slice it. You've got everybody but injured Bo Bauer back right now,
right,
who he was gone halfway through the season and was hobbled to begin with. I think the concern and the strategy is getting the best linebackers on the field and in the right positions. And that really comes down to me thinking what's going to happen at Rover. Is Jalen Sneed going to be able to be a starter or at least play a pretty large rotational role at that Rover position? Is Nolan Ziegler coming along enough? And maybe Jaden Osbury as a kind of a guy that's coming up through the lineage that kind of fits that spot. If that happens, then what do you do with Jack Kaiser? I think Jack Kaiser, in his much more limited snaps, was way more productive than Maris Leofau. So do you kind of put those guys in competition with each other, throw Prince Colley in there? And, JD Bertrand, I think, has middle linebacker locked down. Who becomes his backup if Junior Tuihalamaka is going to play defensive line? I would imagine it would be Drake Bowen of those freshman linebackers. He seems to be the most ready now. The complication there is he's playing baseball starting. I mean, they have games in February. They're counting on him being a position player, which is really difficult to do both when you're not a pitcher. If you have to play a position and have your swing and all that stuff, Cole Kmet could have been a dynamic outfielder, and same with Jeff Samardzija, but they chose to be pitchers because it helped the process along. Drake Bowen's not going to do that. So, but it is an interesting dynamic because there's so much talent in those younger classes, and you've got to get more production, I think, certainly out of that will linebacker spot that Notre Dame got this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that Notre Dame is willing to give Drake Bowen the green light, or I should say, when I say Notre Dame, I mean the football program is willing to give Drake Bowen the green light to play baseball as an early enrollee. That speaks to the confidence that Notre Dame has in the football program has in its linebacker position. Like, it doesn't need Drake Bowen right now, because if it needed him, hey, baseball can wait. Like, we needed to get you ready to play for this season because we think you can, and maybe he still can. I'm not saying he can't, but it's not necessarily something that Notre Dame has to have confidence in its linebacker group going into this season. So I think we have to see more of some of the younger guys than we saw this past year. I am a proponent of moving Jack Kaiser inside and giving him more of Maris Leofau's reps and trying to figure out a different way to use Maris Leofau. And then that opening up different possibilities elsewhere. Get Prince Colley on the field more, get Jalen Sneed on the field more. So I would still say, I mean, granted that the transactions at the position haven't really been a lot. I do think that it will be a better position going into next season.
Then we go to cornerback, hands down a better position. It was getting better as the season ended. You will theoretically have a healthy Cam Hart next year. You'll have Benmo and Jaden Mickey, the two freshmen, one of them a freshman All-American, the other who had some flashes, certainly got a lot of experience as a freshman. You bring in Christian Gray, who I think is going to get involved, and you have Micah Bell, who's going to be one of the fastest players on the team. Just how quickly he gets adjusted to being a college cornerback. Thomas Harper is kind of a hybrid player. He's a safety, but he plays nickel, so he perhaps will pick up the Tariq Bracy role. I mean, there's just a lot to like there. There's a lot of bodies there. There's some that are going to get hopped over on the depth chart, but I like the depth and I like the talent at that position.
Yeah, it's hard for me to sort of separate the cornerback and safety groups just because of the nickel position and the nickel position sort of drawing on the safety group rather than like Tariq Bracy was definitely a corner last year, whereas the nickel next year. It could be Thomas Harper, it could be Ramon Henderson, or it could be Jaden Mickey. I think it's hard. I think all those guys will have opportunities, and maybe they're all used just in different nickel situations. So I think there's a lot of flexibility there. But the cornerback position overall, I think, should improve, even though Tariq Bracy is a big loss. I don't think we can overstate how important of a role he played for Notre Dame this past season. He was really good and gave Notre Dame the ability to play a nickel a lot, especially when it needed to.
At safety, Brandon Joseph didn't play at an All-American level last year. Still think Notre Dame was better off having him, especially early.
Sure.
But at the end of the year, Xavier Watts was playing pretty good football. And I like the fact that G.J. Brown came back. I think it just kind of gives you a safety net at that position. Ramon Henderson's coming on. We don't know what they're going to get out of the freshmen, which two of them will be early enrollees. And we're not sure for sure that Brandon Hillman is going to play safety. He is going to be in the Polynesian Bowl this Saturday, and I think he's going to be playing cornerback. I plan on talking to him a little bit later in the week and seeing how his experience is going with that. But and then Thomas Harper, is he an every down player? Is he a nickel? And again, if Jalen Sneed becomes an every down linebacker, you may not need your nickel quite as much. The hope is that since he has a lot of the traits of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, that he becomes that kind of role player, or that kind of role that you don't need the nickel as much. You can play your base defense because that player is capable of covering slot receivers and tight ends.
Yeah, the safety position it's tough to get a handle on. The Brandon Joseph thing is sort of I don't know that I have a great way to evaluate how he played this season. I think he played pretty well. Didn't make the kind of impact that I anticipated.
And he missed 3 out of the last 4 games.
And I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. And when he missed those games, was the safety position that much different without him? I don't know that it was. I mean, maybe it was, and maybe someone more skilled at evaluating safeties than me might have a stronger opinion there, or be more adamant about it. But I think there's a potential, even though if you lose him, or not if you lose him, though you lost him, you can be better at that position next season. So interested to see what Chris O'Leary can do with those guys at the safety position and how they can continue to ascend. Like, is Xavier Watts a bona fide safety? That's someone that can be relied on. What does Ramon Henderson's role look like? How do you use DJ Brown? Is he more of a luxury than a need? I think that's the ideal situation for Notre Dame, but we'll see how much they end up needing him.
Very good. And then specialists, they're bringing in a couple. The punter Ben Krim, I think, will be kind of a safety net for Bryce McPherson, who is, I've seen him punt in practice. He can punt actually better than John Sott, but mentally he wasn't ready for last year. He had an injury right before the season started. He was going to be the kickoff man. I think they're going to be pretty happy with him. But again, there's going to be competition with Ben. Then Schrader comes in from South Florida. He's probably going to win the kicking competition. So I'd say that they're probably about where they were last year when you come to specialists.
Yeah, I think it's probably about breaking even. But if you look at the transfer additions as well, if you didn't bring them in, what would you have? I think it's then you're definitely improving the roster. You're not relying on Josh Bryan to be your kicker. You bring in Spencer Schrader to do that instead. And you have that sort of backup plan if Bryce McPherson isn't able to ascend as the starting punter, as Brian Mason sort of anticipated he would become. So I think just getting that a little bit more experience in the room. Michael Vincent just won't go away. He's staying as a long snapper again, which is a good thing for Notre Dame. He's been very reliable at the position, and certainly adds some experience to sort of that room of those guys that are always spending time with each other and working on getting better together.
So overall, when we look at the picture and we kind of put the parts together, is this a better roster than last year? I think it is, from the standpoint you definitely got better at, Notre Dame has been held back in big games at cornerback, wide receiver, and quarterback. They haven't been quality enough there. I think you're definitely better at quarterback, definitely better at corner, and there's a lot of good potential at wide receiver. I think, tight end being lesser at tight end, I think you can make up for that with your wide receivers and running backs. Defensive line is the one that I'm looking at where I'm going, because they need to be able to stop the run. And it's going to be a big spring for
and rush the passer. You got to rush the passer too.
Yeah, and rush the passer.
We can't take that for granted because they have been pretty good at it, but that is something you got to keep doing. You can't just sort of take that for granted.
Right. So big spring for the defensive line to be interesting.
Yeah, I think I pretty much agree with everything you said there. I don't know that I think
is rare that you're.
It is rare. I think. Especially the quarterback. I mean, it's the most important position in college football. You have to have a difference maker at quarterback if you want to make a true run at a national championship. And I don't know that Notre Dame's going to do that. Yeah, I'm not convinced necessarily that they're going to do that yet, but I think things are falling in place to give you at least a reason to believe that could be possible. Whereas I'm not sure if you didn't make that addition that would seem very possible at all.
So we're going to move on to the second topic, which is Notre Dame's early enrollees, sizing them up. There's 12 of them. We're not going to talk about the later guys right now. We're going to talk about the 12 that are on campus now, who gets looks in the spring and stuff. There's 12 of them. This is the 18th cycle Notre Dame has done this. It started as an experiment in 2006. Notre Dame was way behind the curve with that. George West and James Aldridge and Chris Stewart were the first class. They had to perform well in the classroom, or they weren't going to do it the next year. And a lot of the early classes were like 3, maybe up to 5. There are a couple times it was 2. The last few years, it's been double digits. So the 12 that are coming in, you've got 3 linebackers, Jaden Osbury, Drake Bowen, who's also playing baseball, and Preston Zinner. You have 3 of the wide receivers, 3 of the 4, Rico Flores Jr., Jaden Greathouse, Braylon James. You have a quarterback in Kenny Minchie. You have 1 offensive lineman in Sam Pendleton, 1 defensive lineman in Devin Houston, and then a couple safeties in Ben Minnick and Adon Schuler. So out of those guys, I actually think there's a handful of them that are going to get some play this spring. What do you think, Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, I think the wide receiver group is a group that you have to sort of evaluate and see what those guys can do. I sort of agree with you that Jaden Greathouse makes the most sense as someone that can come in and be a guy that can find a role next season. But you want to see what Braylon James can do. I think his potential is very interesting. I think Rico Flores is a pretty advanced player. He's coming off a foot injury, I believe. And so how soon does he look like himself? How does that impact his first semester on campus? I think obviously there's an adjustment period for everyone, but we'll see what those guys can do. So I think the receiver position, the safeties, I'm interested to see what I think you'd like to be able to have at least one of your safeties be able to be used, like at least in a pinch. Like I don't know that you're going to count on them to be the top 4 of your rotation going into next season, but I think that's a position that you'd like to be able to know that you have maybe a 5th guy waiting in the wings there that's ready to go out there and make a difference. And then usually a safety like that could probably make an impact on special teams as well. And then Christian Gray, you highlighted him a little bit earlier. I think he's another guy that you got to figure out what he can do, how much he can impact the team, because I think he has the talent to certainly do that eventually. Whether or not that's this season remains to be seen. But those are the guys I'm the most interested in sort of tracking, and I think we'll have our eyes on quite a bit during the spring. What about you?
I agree. And if we just take a peek at the 12 that are coming in June, I would say Jeremiah Love and Brennan Vernon and maybe Brandon Hillman are the three that out of those 12 that I think project. There's a lot of defensive linemen, a lot of offensive linemen in that group. But yeah, and there's always surprises. I mean, Benjamin Morrison was a late addition. We were all raving about Jaden Mickey in the spring, and then
Yeah.
Ben Morrison just kind of zips past him. But I do think those guys are super close. They work overtime together. I think their progress will help each other. They push each other, set high standards for each other. So I think, Jaden Mickey definitely is the one who is more vocal of the two, but Ben Moe was the guy that made freshman All-American.
Yeah.
Okay, if there was a freshman All-American on the early enrollees, who would your
Oh, wow.
guess be? Because it's also based on opportunity, not just talent.
I think I'd probably still go with Greathouse. I think Greathouse would be my pick. I'm not sure. I would be pretty surprised, like borderline shocked if any. I mean, maybe it's another receiver, but
yeah,
maybe,
I would
maybe
guess
Christian Gray.
Christian Gray.
Yeah,
if Christian Gray could play some nickel, and I don't know that he can. I know that he can play, but I'm not sure quite where he fits in. But he's ready.
I mean, to me, that would mean that Cam Hart had a very poor season or got hurt. Like if Christian Gray were to become a freshman All-American, it's hard to sort of imagine that path. But I think, you never know. You can't rule anything out.
Super humble kid, very confident kid, and he's told me he's a chef. So people are going to want to be his roommate.
So John Dillon had asked, which of the incoming freshmen do you see making the biggest impact for the 2023 season? I think we've covered that pretty well, but since we picked one from the early enrollees, if you had to pick one from the June enrollment, who's the, if I made you pick just one, you can't pick multiples, who would be the guy that you're the most interested that could make the biggest impact this season?
I think Jeremiah Love is the most camera ready. I think Brennan Vernon, as you mentioned earlier, he's an intriguing guy. There was a point where he was on a trajectory to be a 5-star player.
Mm-hmm.
I just think the national guys haven't been able to evaluate him as much as they've wanted to. But I think he has that kind of potential. He's a unique personality. So I don't know how, sometimes that helps you, sometimes that holds you back. But I'm going to roll my dice with Brennan Vernon.
Yeah, he would be my pick as well. I think, maybe Brandon Hillman, but he's just so raw. Like it's crazier things have happened, but it's like he needs to sort of be put at a position and just let him sort of grow there, then have to be thrown in there. Jeremiah Love would be interesting, but there's so many talented running backs on the roster that it's like, well, how is he getting into the lineup and making an impact? So I think Vernon would be, especially if we're concerned about the defensive line going into next season, it makes sense to me that a defensive lineman who has a very high ceiling and is pretty physically developed would be the guy that could potentially make the biggest impact this season.
I mean, if you looked at that picture of the guys from Notre Dame that were down there, the All-American game, Sullivan Absher is a pretty big guy, and Brendan Vernon kind of made him look small. Not tiny, but you're like, he looked older and bigger and more physical and way more college ready just looking at a photo.
Yeah, Sullivan's a big dude too. I've seen him in person, but he does have a little bit of a baby face, so I think that might be holding his physical appearance back. But I actually like him as a prospect. I know he didn't have a great week in pass protection because he wasn't really asked to do that in high school. So it's not surprising that when you're going against some of the best defensive linemen in the country in your grade, that you're not exactly killing it out there doing that. But I like his potential long term, but the need for an offensive lineman to have an impact at Notre Dame next season as a freshman is very, very, very small.
Okay, the next place we're going to go is the recruiting reset. So let's start with five-star defensive tackle Justin Scott setting an announcement date. It's January 31st. It's his birthday. He hasn't been to the Notre Dame campus in a while. He's a five-star defensive tackle from Chicago. So what do we think about him setting the date? Do we feel like Notre Dame has reason to be optimistic about this?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, we're still trying to figure this out. If you would ask me this question a week ago and said, okay, Justin Scott's going to commit on January 31st, is he picking Notre Dame? I said, no, it didn't hasn't been much lately in his recruitment that would lead me to believe that he was ready to pick Notre Dame. Now, being he's from a Chicago kid, he's visited. It's not like he's unfamiliar with Notre Dame, but he hasn't visited Notre Dame in quite some time.
Right.
Opted to visit other places. Maybe they get him on campus before January 31st. Notre Dame doesn't necessarily have any like big junior days scheduled the rest of the month, but they can host him. And given that he's from Chicago, it's not like it's a long trip for him, so he could make his way over. And if I'm Notre Dame, I'm pushing for that to happen. Like, hey, get over here for one more visit before you make up your mind. I don't get the sense that he's like made his decision. A lot of times when guys set their commitment date, they already know that it's just a matter of like them telling everyone at that point. I don't know that he's made his decision yet from anything that I can figure. So I'm not really going to say yes, it's Notre Dame or no, it's not Notre Dame yet. But I think Notre Dame is right there in the mix, and we're working to get more information for our subscribers, and that'll appear first on the Insider Lounge message board. I know Kyle Kelly's been working on that. I did hear some optimism from Notre Dame when speaking to people today. So that is good news, but it wasn't like, yes, Justin Scott is coming to Notre Dame. Like that's not the feedback I've received yet. I think it's worth mentioning his top 8, which was named earlier this month, which is a pretty short turnaround to go from 8 to 1 in less than a month. His top 8 was Notre Dame, Alabama, Colorado, Miami, Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon, and USC. So a lot of national interest there, which makes sense given he's a 5-star defensive tackle. But the fact that he's interested in those programs nationally, not just that those programs are interested in him, is of note. And I think on paper it was like, well, maybe there's reason to be concerned that he doesn't end up at Notre Dame. But we'll see how this develops in the next couple of weeks. It certainly would be a massive addition for Notre Dame, and would be pretty disappointing given that Notre Dame missed out on Justin Moore or Jason Moore last. Is it Jason or Justin? Justin is
Jason
Moore. Justin is his brother who plays basketball. Given that they missed out on him, a one-time 5-star defensive tackler, I don't remember exactly where he is currently. I think he's down to a 4-star, but a highly ranked defensive tackle. And then obviously the way things worked out with Keon Keeley, if you have a chance to get a 5-star defensive lineman, especially a kid from Chicago, that's a really, really important recruit for Notre Dame.
Okay. And I'll remind people what Tyler said is absolutely true. There's guys that set decision and they don't know. I remember talking to Emil Wagner last spring, and I said, how did you trick everybody into not having a graphic ready for you, not knowing where you were going? He goes, I didn't know. So he goes, there wasn't anybody to tell, until a few hours before he made the announcement. And then Notre Dame just felt right, and he announced for Notre Dame and surprised even the Notre Dame coaching staff. Surprised us. We weren't paying any attention to it because we thought we would know something. So sometimes there are surprises. No surprises at the junior day. Notre Dame did a really good job with this, I think. They had all 7 of their commitments for the 2024 class come to campus. And then they had a smaller group. What was it, about 9 or 10? Mostly 2024 guys and maybe 1 or 2 2025s.
Yeah, that's right. And by the end of the weekend, there were 9 recruits in the 2024 or 2025 classes that either had Notre Dame offers going into the visit or received one during the visit. So I think there ended up only being one guy that visited that still doesn't have a Notre Dame offer. And that's in addition to the 7 commits in the 2024 class. So Notre Dame had a lot of success last year with its junior day that happened later in January, given all the staff turnover that was still happening in January of last year for Notre Dame. And so I think they're in position to have a lot of success with these guys. I think there's a lot of good feelings about where Notre Dame stands with a number of these guys who are on campus, and I'll rattle off the names for us.
There's some big high 4-star guys in this group.
Yeah, the 2024 targets include linebacker Darius Hayes, an outside linebacker, safety target Bronte Johnson, who also plays some wide receiver out of Fort Wayne, Walter Matthews, a 2024 tight end target who is enormous. I saw him get out of his vehicle as he arrived at the Goog on Saturday morning, and he's a very tall fella. Peyton Pierce is a linebacker out of Texas that Notre Dame likes a lot, and he likes Notre Dame a lot. Styles Prescott is a kid out of Indiana, the Indianapolis area, that received a Notre Dame offer while on campus, and has since started getting other offers. I think Wisconsin, Penn State, and Michigan might be the most recent ones. So I think teams are like, well, if Notre Dame's offering an in-state kid, we better get an offer in there soon because he might end up in their class sooner rather than later. So we'll see how things progress with him. The Smith twins, Jacob Smith and Jared Smith, who are definitely easy. They're easier to tell apart than the Adamalola twins, although I thought it was fairly easy to tell the Adamalola twins apart early in their careers. Although the older they got, I felt like they started looking more like each other. And then Bryant Young's son, was also on campus as an offer, and I think that's towards the top of the list of the guys that visit this weekend that could end up in Notre Dame's class. And then 2025 wide receiver / cornerback Dorian Brew out of Ohio received an offer on the visit as well. So an impressive visitors list. Everything we've heard so far is that things went well, and there's a lot of positivity surrounding these recruits and where things are headed for Notre Dame with them. And we'll continue to sort of have updates on InsideNDSports.com and the Insider Lounge about where Notre Dame sits with them, what those guys have to say about their visits. I know Kyle Kelly's been busy giving us quotes and insight into what happened on those visits for those guys. And it's a busy time to get the 2024 cycle starting to roll again.
Right. And I know that people are more skeptical about commitments because of what's going on with the dirty NIL money. But I still think, and Marcus, I agree with Marcus Freeman on this, it's better to have them committed to you. That doesn't mean you stop recruiting them, but I think it's harder to get, to separate yourselves if you're not already have that commitment from them. And really, when we think about it, there were some decommitments in this class. Notre Dame also flipped some guys from other classes, but I still think you're better off having that commitment, even if you have to fight for it all the way to the end. So, okay, we'll move on to the next bit of news. Today was the deadline for players with remaining eligibility in college to have to declare for the draft by today. We didn't expect any new people today. The last person that kind of had a decision was DJ Brown, and he elected to come back to Notre Dame. They got a pretty sizable draft pool when we look at it. We got Michael Mayer, Isaiah Foskey, and some of these guys were out of eligibility, although some people judged it as breaking news when they announced they were going to be in the draft. Jarrett Patterson, Josh Lugg, Brandon Joseph, the Adamalola twins, Tariq Bracy, Chris Smith, John Sott, Blake Grupe, Bo Bauer, if he still wants to play, Houston Griffith. And then Braden Lindsey would have been eligible, but he announced he's hanging up his cleats and he's getting into the business world. So that's going to be a busy, combine, pro day, draft. We should find out about the combine invites pretty soon. Now, the list of all the players that have given up eligibility to go into college won't come out until Friday. The NFL will come out with an official list.
Yeah, I thought it was I was keeping an eye on what the decisions were for some of Notre Dame's opponents going into next season. And obviously CJ Stroud, Ohio State's quarterback, entered the draft. There was some rumors that it didn't make a lot of sense that maybe he would stay at Ohio State, and I was tuned into what our Ohio State site was reporting, and they were all over it saying there's no way he's coming back. He's staying in terms of sticking with the plan and going into the NFL draft. Left tackle Paris Johnson Jr. from Ohio State, and obviously wide receiver Jackson Smith-Njigba. And also they're losing their starting center, Luke Whippler, early. Those guys are significant losses for Ohio State. Jordan Addison and Tuli Tuipulotu from USC. Tuli being a defensive lineman and Jordan Addison being the former Biletnikoff Award winner at receiver. And then Clemson lost some big-time guys from its defense, Brian Brzee, Miles Murphy, and Trenton Simpson. So those are some of the bigger headlines from Notre Dame's 2023 schedule that were worth mentioning, which leads me to this question that we have here from T-Stop, who is killing it with the questions today. The 2023 schedule is full of new coaches, new quarterbacks, and subpar football schools. Hartman feels a major need for us in the portal. Have any of our opponents filled similar sized gaps? Are there specific teams to worry about?
I'm trying to think. USC's gotten a few, not anything like they did last year with Caleb Williams and Jordan Addison. Trying to think off the top. Ohio State doesn't dabble in the portal too much. And Clemson doesn't either. I'm trying to think of the games that are going to be super competitive games. What do you have there, Tyler?
I know Louisville's been very active in the transfer portal. I don't know that they have one like headline guy, like this is the guy that is going to make a big difference for sure.
Didn't they get the defensive end from Stanford, Stephen Herron?
Herron, yeah, they got him. I think they also had someone that I think they ended up losing. I don't recall. It might have been. I think there was an Arkansas safety that was committed to them. I can't think of his name.
Was it Catalan?
No, it was the other one.
Okay.
Because Catalan was injured. He didn't really play much, but their other safety, Miles Slusher, I think is his name.
Okay.
And I think I want to say he was committed to Louisville and then he changed his commitment. But they still have a lot of guys. I pulled up our transfer tracker here. They still have 3 guys who are rated in the top 100 of our rivals portal rankings. And Kevin Coleman's a receiver from Jackson State, and Marquise Groves Killebrew is a defensive back from Texas A&M. So they made some big additions there. USC did bring in it's bringing in a lot of guys too. Like you said, they didn't bring in a Caleb Williams, but Anthony Lucas out of Texas A&M chose USC. Marshawn Lloyd, the running back from South Carolina, chose the other USC. And so those will be big additions for USC. A couple other guys that are ranked in our rivals portal rankings in top 100. Michael Tarquin, an offensive lineman from Florida, and a linebacker from Oklahoma State, Mason Cobb. So the portal roster turnover at USC remains high, although there's not necessarily I don't think they added a Heisman Trophy winner in the transfer portal this offseason.
And one of note, Notre Dame plays NC State next year, and Brennan Armstrong from Virginia transferred there. Now they had some other quarterbacks that played for them and that they feel good about that are young quarterbacks, so he's going to have to compete. But they did give themselves a veteran presence. I like Brennan Armstrong. I think he'll do well.
I got another. I have another question for us. It's sort of off the wall, not related to anything we're talking about. But who do you think will return punt in 2023? Irish Blessing asks us.
Maybe Jeremiah Love. Jabron Payne will probably get a look back there. They looked at Tobias. They put him through what Brian Polian used to call the Gong Show. I'm trying to think who else.
Lorenzo Styles would be who I would be interested in seeing.
Yeah, Styles would definitely. And they looked at a lot of they ran a lot of those guys through practices, even though they didn't use them. I know that nobody wants me to say Matt Salerno, but Matt Salerno.
Yeah. I think Jaden Mickey's. Did he get some?
Jaden
reps?
Mickey got some. I'm trying to think who else. Maybe Hillman just based on his athletic. We'll put him everywhere. He's going to play every
Well,
position.
I mean, if we're
every
just put,
special team.
I mean, if we're talking about a guy with speed, Micah Bell, hey, can you return punts? I mean, that would be.
I'd like to see him on kickoffs. I think that would be interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, I was talking to Tom Lemming, the longtime recruiting analyst who runs the Prep Football Report, and he's just very, very impressed with Michael Bell's speed.
Yeah, hard not to be because he is very fast. I had another question here, which was submitted to us on Twitter. I'm not sure if you saw it or not. Christine Golick asked us, curious to hear your thoughts on why Bob Golick hasn't made it into the College Football Hall of Fame with Michael Stonebreaker making it in. I started to wonder, Christine asks, what are your thoughts on Bob Golick as a College Football Hall of Fame candidate?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that kind of fall into that category where you say, what's up with this? And you see somebody younger at a position get in, and you wonder, okay, did Mike Stonebreaker have more votes than Bob Golick? It seems like they enlist the membership to vote, but then they kind of manipulate the vote after, so that you don't have like 4 Notre Dame guys in one class, for example. There's not a great reason for Bob Golick not to be in there. You look statistic wise, you look that he was on some pretty good teams. It wasn't like Mike Golick, who played during the Faust era. You could ding somebody because they weren't on winning teams. He was on winning teams. He was, I think, spent his time with the whole Dan Devine era. So, boy, I wish I had a better answer other than the fact that there's not really a great rhyme or reason to it. That there are, I mean, there's so many deserving people that aren't in it, and as we mentioned last week, it seems like a very low threshold for the coaches to get in,
right?
And
it's so many great players.
Maybe too high of a threshold for players. And Bob Golick, to me, is certainly a Hall of Famer. There's no question. When you say top 5 linebackers of the modern era, you've got to have Bob Golick in that conversation.
Yeah, and I think the only like actual thresholds there are is like as a coach, you have to have a 600 winning percentage, I believe. And then as a player, you have to have been a first team All-American. And Bob Golick certainly reached that standard. I believe he was a first team All-American twice. So he certainly is a worthy candidate. And you mentioned like sort of how they manipulate things. I think when I was reviewing Notre Dame's most recent inductees, it was like every other year they have one. It's not like that seems too odd to be random. Like, why is it every other year there's a Notre Dame guy going into the College Football Hall of Fame? Maybe that is just coincidence that it works out that way, but it does seem a bit strange that it is that. So
I'll tell you, all Hall of Fames seem weird, and I'm even in one, and I still don't know how I got in. But
same.
Yeah, we both are for different ones. But like the baseball thing, I don't understand the rationale. Well, this guy, no, I'm not voting him on the first ballot. I mean, and then they don't fill out 10 names. So if he's good enough to be there 3 years from now, why isn't he good enough to be there today? What is he doing in the 3 years that are going to pass that are going to make him more Hall of Fame worthy? That's what I don't understand about some of these processes. And again, I think there's too few players that get into the College Football Hall of Fame, and they do have like a veterans committee for when guys kind of get passed over too much, but usually they're dead by then. So let's get Bob Golick in while he's still alive and still funny.
The campaign starts here. We'll lead the fight. I have one more question from CMAC, who just recently submitted that, and we'll get that in. Oh, this is a different one. Why are so many counting out Tyler Buckner? Is from CMAC.
Because of how good Sam Hartman is. I think Tyler Buckner is, I'm still one of the people that are on his bandwagon and think he's going to be a really good player. But I think the best thing for this team is for Sam Hartman to be the number one quarterback, for Tyler Buchner to stay, learn for Sam Hartman, and then be in the competition for 2024 and have a very good chance of winning the job in 2024. But I mean, he showed a lot of guts in the Gator Bowl game. He showed some skills that maybe we hadn't seen from him. He shook off a lot of rust. That had to be very difficult coming back after not playing for 10 games. But I wouldn't give up on Tyler Buchner. But, you know, if they brought in somebody like Brennan Armstrong, I think Tyler would have had a chance to win the job. I just think it's, having seen both of them play, wow, Sam Hartman is just really difficult to beat. It's just, I can't see a scenario where he's not the starting quarterback if he's healthy.
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely Notre Dame fans who had given up on Tyler Buchner and counted him out even before Sam Hartman was added to Notre Dame's roster. I was not in that camp, and I don't think Eric was either. So I think that it's just a matter of what Sam Hartman has done. I mean, Notre Dame brought Sam Hartman in for a reason. The stat I've cited to sort of illustrate the difference between the two is Sam Hartman has thrown 110 touchdown passes in his college career, and Tyler Buchner has attempted 118 passes overall in his college career. So Sam Hartman has just played so much football and played so much football at a high level.
And gotten better every year.
That it seems hard to imagine Tyler Buchner being able to beat him out in practice, given all the game tape that Sam Hartman has of proof of what he is and what he can be. So I think I can speak for both of us in saying we're not ruling Tyler Buchner out in the long run as a potential quarterback and difference maker at the college football level. But he's got a long climb to try to beat Sam Hartman out this coming off season going into the 2023 season. All right, Eric, I think that's it. Is there anything else you wanted to squeeze in here before we go?
Well, we were both wrong on our score predictions of the national championship game, which was in progress, but we picked the right team, and that should count for something. I also want to say I really want to thank everybody that's been tuning in both live and when we're not live, because I think we had thought about just, okay, at the end of the regular season, that'll be it for this. And the viewership keeps growing and the subscribers keep growing. So please share with your friends, hit the subscribe button. It really helps us out. I know it sounds like we're selling Girl Scout cookies. Please buy from us. But you don't even have to pay anything to subscribe. It's free.
Yeah, one of the rare subscriptions that doesn't require a fee. I echo those sentiments. As I sort of mentioned earlier, we're sort of working on a live YouTube plan for the off season of whether or not that continues on Monday or a different day. So if you have strong opinions one way or the other, let us know in the comments. We would be curious to see it. Obviously, our viewership is greater after we're live, so we hope and like to think that our views will continue to increase regardless of when we actually do the live show. But we obviously want to do it at a time, the live show at a time where people can interact with us and submit questions. So we certainly appreciate everyone who tunes in live and helps contribute to the show.
We will have to call it something different than Monday Night Live if we move it off. So if you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments below.
Yeah.
Whoever has the most creative, if somebody comes up with something like Pot of Gold, which was our old podcast at the Tribune, if you come up with something that good, we'll have a prize for you. It'll be better than an autographed picture of Tyler.
Wow, that must be a pretty good prize then. If we're going to promise that. I would be open to suggestions. And maybe we should name it something that's not connected to the day. So if we decide to move it around to different days during the off season, we could do that too. So if you have suggestions for us about potential names for off season live shows, we'd love to hear those too. We will have an Inside ND Sports podcast later this week. We are always, as you should know, spending time on the Insider Lounge message board and producing content for InsideNDSports.com. Have a great evening.